Story: The Bottomless Heart of Haruna. The official story, the one you'll find in glossy travel brochures and on government-sponsored tourism websites, is one of serene beauty. They'll tell you Lake Haruna is a caldera lake, a sapphire jewel cradled in the green, sleeping arms of a dormant volcano in Gudma Prefecture. They'll show you pictures of swan boats gliding across its placid surface, of Mount Haruna's perfect cone reflected in the water, a mirror image of Fuji's grandeur. They'll speak of crisp autumn air, the vibrant red of Japanese maples, and the quiet dignity of the Haruna Shrine, nestled among ancient cedars. This is the story I came to capture. My name is Kenji Tanaka, but I go by Ken. It's easier for my clients back in the States. I'm a photographer, a chaser of light and shadow, and my latest assignment for Wanderlust magazine was a simple one: Japan's hidden gems. My editor, a man named Dave who communicated primarily in caffeinated emails, wanted the postcard version. He wanted the swans, the mountain, the shrine. He wanted a story of peace. What I found was something else entirely. What I found was the other story, the one the old-timers tell in hushed tones after the third cup of sake, the one that clings to the air like the lake's perpetual mist. They say Lake Haruna is bottomless. They say its cold, dark heart holds more than just water. They say it holds akane. My journey began with the jarring efficiency of the Shinkansen, which spat me out into the slower, more traditional rhythm of Gunma. From there it was a series of local trains and a final winding bus ride up the mountain. With every switchback turn, the concrete and noise of the city fell away, replaced by the deep, humming silence of the forest. The air grew thin and clean, smelling of pine and damp earth. By the time I checked into my ryokan, a traditional inn named the Heron's Rest, the sun was a bleeding orange smear behind the mountain, and the lake was a sheet of polished obsidian. The innkeeper was a man named Mr. Sato, a relic from a bygone era. He was impossibly old, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, but his back was straight as a bamboo stalk. He bowed with a formality that felt both comforting and ancient. "Tanaka-sama," he said, his voice a dry rustle of leaves. "Welcome. We hope our humble inn provides you with tranquility." There was a strange emphasis on the last word, a subtle weight that I registered but couldn't quite place. I just smiled, my Americanized grin feeling clumsy and out of place. "Thank you, Sato-san. I'm just here to take some pictures. Your lake is famous." His eyes, dark and knowing, flickered towards the window, towards the darkening water. "Famous for many things," he murmured, so softly I wasn't sure if I was meant to hear it. The first few days were a photographer's dream. I woke before dawn, my tripod and gear slung over my shoulder, and hiked to the water's edge. I captured the mist, a living, breathing entity that swirled and danced on the surface, obscuring and then revealing the mountain in a tantalizing striptease. I shot the Haruna Shrine, its red lacquered wood a vibrant slash of color against the deep green of the cedars. I even rented one of the ridiculous swan boats, paddling out to the center of the lake to get the perfect panoramic shot, feeling a bit foolish but satisfied with the results. The lake was preternaturally still. Not just calm, but still. It absorbed sound. A bird's call would be swallowed. The whisper of the wind in the trees seemed to stop at the shoreline. Out in the middle of that vast, silent water, I felt a profound sense of isolation, a feeling that I was a tiny, insignificant speck floating on a great, unblinking eye. It was on the third evening that the tranquility began to fray at the edges. I was reviewing the day's shots on my laptop in my tatami room. The air had grown cold, and I'd slid open the paper shoji screen to look at the lake, now a pool of mercury under a full moon. That's when I heard it, a sound, faint and melodic. It sounded like singing, a woman's voice, high and filled with a sorrow so pure it felt like a physical chill crawling up my spine. I stood and walked to the open screen, straining my ears. The sound was coming from the lake. I scanned the dark water, my heart starting to thud against my ribs. There was nothing, no boats, no people on the shore. The singing continued for another moment, a single heartbreaking note that hung in the air before being abruptly cut off, as if a hand had been clapped over the singer's mouth. Silence rushed back in, heavier and more menacing than before. I told myself it was the wind, or my ears playing tricks on me, or maybe a tourist playing a late-night prank. But the feeling of unease didn't leave. It settled in the pit of my stomach, a cold, hard knot. The next day I tried to shake it off. I focused on my work, hiking around to the far side of the lake, an area less frequented by tourists. The path was overgrown, and the air here was thicker, heavy with the smell of decay from the damp undergrowth. I found a small, forgotten cove, the water inky black and choked with reeds. It was a perfect spot for a moody, atmospheric shot. I set up my tripod, framing the shot carefully. The dark water in the foreground, the skeletal branches of a dead tree reaching out like desperate fingers, the imposing face of the mountain in the background. As I looked through the viewfinder, adjusting the focus, a flicker of white at the edge of the frame caught my eye. I pulled my head back. There, standing among the reeds on the opposite side of the small cove, was a woman. She was dressed in a simple white kimono, the kind you might see in old photographs or period dramas. Her hair was impossibly long and black, falling like a sheet of silk almost to her knees. Her face was turned away from me, looking out at the center of the lake. I couldn't see her features, but the slump of her shoulders, the stillness of her posture, radiated a grief that was almost palpable. "Sumimasen!" I called out. "Excuse me!" She didn't move. She didn't even seem to register my voice. A model, I thought. Part of a photo shoot. It was the only logical explanation. I raised my camera again, thinking I could get a candid shot. She was beautiful, in a haunting, ethereal way. I zoomed in, focusing on her silhouette against the dark water. Through the lens, I saw her head slowly, mechanically begin to turn towards me. My finger tightened on the shutter button. The movement was unnatural, too fluid, like a doll's head on a swivel. As her face came into view, my breath hitched in my throat. Her skin was the color of bleached bone. Her eyes were two dark, empty sockets. Her mouth was a lipless slash that stretched into a silent scream. But the most horrifying part was what wasn't there. There was no texture to her skin, no life in her form. She looked blurry, like a watercolor painting left out in the rain, her edges bleeding into the scenery behind her. My camera's autofocus whirred, unable to lock onto her. The focus ring spun back and forth, the motor whining in protest. A digital error message flashed on my screen. Object not found. I lowered the camera, my hands shaking. My eyes, unaided by the lens, looked back across the cove. She was gone. There was no sound of retreat, no rustle of reeds, no splash of water. She had simply ceased to be there. I stood frozen for a full minute, my mind screaming, refusing to process what my eyes and my camera had just told me. I packed my gear with fumbling, clumsy hands and practically ran back down the path, not stopping until the red torii gate of the shrine was in sight, feeling as though its sacred presence was the only thing holding the encroaching shadows at bay. That night, sleep offered no escape. I dreamt I was in the swan boat again, drifting in the center of the lake. The sun was setting, painting the sky in fiery hues, but the water below me wasn't reflecting the sky. It was black, a deep, bottomless inkwell black. I leaned over the side, peering into the depths, and a face peered back up at me. It was the woman in white, Akane. Her eyes were no longer empty sockets, but shining black pearls filled with an ancient sorrow. Her long hair swirled around her like a shroud of kelp. She reached up a pale, waterlogged hand, her fingers unnaturally long. Her lips moved, and this time I heard the words, clear as a bell, whispered directly into my mind. Samishi. Lonely. Her hand broke the surface of the water, and the dream water was no longer water. It was ice. It froze my skin on contact. Her fingers brushed my cheek, and the cold was absolute, a void of all heat, all life. I tried to scream, but my lungs were filled with that same icy water, and I woke up gasping, thrashing in my futon, my chest burning. The tatami mat beneath me was damp, and the room was freezing, despite the heater being on. The scent of lake water and wet rot hung heavy in the air. I knew then that I couldn't dismiss it anymore. This wasn't the wind or a prank or a tired mind. Something was in that lake, and it knew I was there. The next morning, I found Mr. Sato sweeping the stone path at the entrance to the inn. My usual cheerful, "Ohayo gozaimasu," died on my lips. He looked up at me, and the knowing expression was back in his eyes, but this time it was tinged with pity. "You did not sleep well, Tanaka-sama," he stated. It wasn't a question. "Sato-san," I began, my voice hoarse. "The lake. There are stories about the lake, aren't there? Old stories. He stopped sweeping and leaned on his broom, his ancient gaze fixed on the water. Some stories are not meant for brochures, they are for warning. He led me to his private quarters at the back of the inn, a small, cluttered room that smelled of incense and green tea. He poured 2 cups of tea with steady hands, the silence stretching between us. Finally, he spoke. "They say the lake has no bottom," he began, his voice low. "Geologists will tell you this is not true. They will give you a number, 13 meters, a shallow lake, they say. They are fools. They measure with lines and weights. They do not understand that some depths cannot be measured in meters." He took a slow sip of his tea. "Long ago, in the time of the samurai, a girl named Akane lived in a village on this mountain. She was the daughter of a wealthy landowner, known for her beauty and her kindness. She was betrothed to a young samurai, a man she loved with all her heart. But he was called to a war in a distant province. He promised to return, but the months turned into years. One day, a traveling monk brought news. Her samurai had not fallen in battle. He had taken a new wife in the city, the daughter of a powerful lord, and would not be returning. My own recent breakup, the hollow feeling of betrayal from a woman I thought I'd spend my life with, echoed in Sato's words. It was a shallow wound compared to this, but the ghost of that pain made Akane's story feel terrifyingly close. Akane's heart, Sato continued, his eyes distant, was broken. The world lost its color, food lost its taste, laughter became a painful noise. One moonless night, consumed by her grief, she walked to the shore of the lake. She filled the sleeves of her finest white kimono with stones, and she walked into the cold, dark water, seeking a peace she could no longer find in the world of the living. He paused, and the air in the room grew heavy. But she did not find peace. The shock of the cold, the agony of her drowning, and the bitterness of her betrayal curdled her spirit. Her sorrow became rage, her love became a hungry, possessive thing. She did not die. She remained. A Yuri, a ghost, tied to the place of her suffering. They say her grief was so immense, so heavy, that it sank to the very bottom of the lake, creating an abyss from which she could never escape.
"And now?" I whispered. "Now," he said, his gaze sharp and direct, "she waits. She is lonely. The shamishisa, the loneliness, is a cold fire that consumes her. And sometimes, when a man comes to the lake alone, a man with a shadow in his own heart, she feels a kinship. She sees a reflection of her own sorrow, and she calls to him. Shamishi, the word from my dream." "She doesn't want to harm them," Sato said, a profound sadness in his voice. "She wants company. She wants to pull them down into her cold, quiet world, to hold them forever, so she will not be lonely anymore. There have been accidents. Over the years, drownings, boats found empty. The police call them tragedies. We who have lived here for generations, we know what they are." A cold dread, colder than my dream, washed over me. I wasn't just a random photographer. I was a man alone, a man nursing his own fresh heartbreak, a man with a shadow in his heart. She hadn't just noticed me, she had chosen me. My professional instinct, my skepticism, my entire modern worldview was a flimsy raft being torn apart in a storm of primal fear. Dave and his Wanderlust article felt like a message from another planet, a life I no longer inhabited. The only reality was this room, this old man, and the horrifying truth of the beautiful lake outside. "What do I do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I have to leave. I'll pack my things right now." Mr. Sato shook his head slowly. "It is not that simple, Tanaka-sama. You have seen her. She has spoken to you in your dreams. She has touched you. Her attention is like a fishhook. The more you struggle, the deeper it sets. To leave now would be to tear the hook from your soul. She will not let you go so easily. She will follow." The thought was paralyzing. Her in the city, her face in the reflection of a skyscraper window, her whisper in the sterile silence of a hotel room, her cold, wet touch in a crowded subway car. There would be no escape. "Then what?" I demanded, desperation making my voice sharp. "Do I just wait for her to drag me to the bottom of that godforsaken lake?"
There is one way, Sato said, his voice hesitant. A story, a legend. They say her rage is tied to her betrayal, but her sorrow is tied to what she lost, not just her love, but a physical piece of herself, a gift from him, a comb carved from mother of pearl that she wore in her hair. It was her most treasured possession. When she walked into the water, it came loose and sank into the mud. Her spirit cannot rest without it. It is the anchor of her sorrow. So I have to find it? I asked, a sliver of insane hope piercing through my terror. Find a comb at the bottom of a lake? It is not just at the bottom of the lake, Sato said, his voice dropping to a near inaudible whisper. It is at the bottom of her abyss, the place her grief created, the place that is not on any map. To go there, it is to enter her world. No one who has sought it has ever returned. The choice was no choice at all. Stay and be haunted until my mind unraveled, or my body was found floating face down in the water. Or I could face her. I could descend into the abyss. My photographer's eye, the part of me that was always observing, always framing, kicked in with a grim, fatalistic clarity. This was the real story, not the swan boats and the pretty mountain. This was the hidden gem, the darkness lurking beneath the serene surface. And I was the only one who could capture it, not with my camera, but with my life. That evening, I prepared. Mr. Sato, seeing the resolve in my eyes, gave me what little help he could. He brought me a small, waterproof pouch containing a packet of purified salt and a tiny, hand-carved wooden charm from the Haruna shrine. For protection, he said. It may not be much against such a powerful sorrow, but faith is a light in the darkness. He also gave me a length of strong rope and a small, heavy grappling hook. The bottom is thick mud. You will need this. My plan was madness. I would rent one of the small rowboats, not the swans, just after dusk when the rental stall was closing and the lake was deserted. I would row to the center, to the spot where I'd felt the deepest cold, the most profound silence, and I would go in. As night fell, a thick fog rolled down from the mountain, blanketing the lake in a shroud of white. It was perfect. The fog would hide me. It would also isolate me completely, turning the lake into a small, claustrophobic world of gray mist and black water. I slipped out of the inn, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. The world was muffled and surreal. I found the boats bobbing gently by the dock. A $20 bill left under a rock was enough to assuage my guilt over the rental. Rowing out was like navigating through a dream. I couldn't see the shore in any direction. There was only my boat, the rhythmic splash of the oars, and the swirling, sightless fog. I stopped when I felt it, a sudden, unnatural drop in temperature. The air grew frigid, and my breath plumed in front of me. This was the spot, the epicenter of her sorrow. I tied the rope to a cleat on the boat, and the other end around my waist. It was a foolish gesture. If she truly wanted me, a rope wouldn't stop her. But it was a psychological anchor to the surface world, a world of air and light. I stripped down to my shorts, the cold air biting at my skin. I took the grappling hook in one hand and the salt pouch in my pocket. My mind was a whirlwind of terror and a strange, fatalistic calm. I thought of my camera, my job, my apartment in Brooklyn. It all seemed so distant, so trivial. The only thing that was real was the black, silent water waiting for me. I took one last, deep breath and slipped over the side of the boat. The cold was a physical blow. It was 1,000 needles of ice stabbing into every inch of my skin. It stole my breath, constricted my chest, and for a moment I panicked, flailing in the dark. I forced myself to be calm, to control my breathing. I opened my eyes. It was pitch black. The light of the moon and stars was completely obliterated by the fog and the water's murky depths. I began to pull myself down, using the anchor line of the boat I'd also thrown over. Hand over hand, I descended into the absolute blackness. The pressure built in my ears. The cold was beginning to seep into my bones, a deep, numbing ache. The geologic depth of 13 meters came and went. I was still descending. Sato was right. This was not a physical depth. I was sinking into something else. Then I felt it. A presence. It was all around me. a subtle pressure in the water, a vibration that hummed through my body. I was in her domain. A whisper echoed in my mind, not in Japanese or English, but in the pure, raw language of emotion. Lonely, so cold. I kept pulling myself down, my lungs screaming for air. My vision began to tunnel. And then, through the blackness, I saw a faint, phosphorescent glimmer below me. The bottom. My feet touched soft, yielding mud. It sucked at my ankles, cold and greedy. The light was emanating from the mud itself, a sickly, pale luminescence. And in that ghostly light, I saw them. Skeletons. Dozens of them, half buried in the silt, their bones picked clean and white. Some were clad in the rotting remains of ancient armor, others in the tattered clothes of fishermen or hikers from more recent decades. They were all here, her collection, her companions in the abyss. They were arranged in a loose circle, all facing a central point. And in that center, I saw her. Akane was no longer the beautiful, sorrowful woman from my dream. She was a nightmare. Her body was bloated and discolored, her skin peeling away in gray sheets. Her white kimono was a tattered, muddy rag. Her hair, once like silk, was a tangled, writhing nest of black weeds that spread out into the mud around her. And her face was a mask of pure, undiluted agony. Her jaw was unhinged in a permanent, silent shriek, and her eyes were burning with a cold, black fire. She hadn't noticed me yet. She was staring at her own hands, which were clenched into tight fists, buried in the mud before her. She was searching, endlessly, desperately, for the thing she had lost. My lungs were on fire. The rope around my waist felt impossibly thin. I had maybe 30 seconds of consciousness left. I had to act. I fumbled with the grappling hook, my fingers numb and clumsy. I cast it towards the spot where she was digging. The prongs snagged on something hard. I pulled. The object came loose from the mud with a soft schloop. Akane's head snapped up. Her burning eyes locked onto mine. The psychic shriek of her rage hit me like a physical force, rattling my bones. Thief! The water around me began to churn. The skeletons in the mud began to stir, their bony fingers twitching, reaching for me. Akane surged towards me, not swimming, but propelled by pure hatred, her mouth wide, her hair swirling around her like a vortex of death. I reeled in the grappling hook. Caught in its tines was a small, delicate object, caked in mud, but unmistakably a comb. It shimmered with a faint, pearlescent light, the last remnant of its former beauty, the mother-of-pearl comb. I had no time. Akane was upon me. I didn't try to fight. I didn't try to flee. I did the only thing I could. I held out the comb, an offering. My mind screamed at her, not in words, but in feelings. I pushed every ounce of empathy I had in me through that connection she had forged. I understand. Your sorrow, your loneliness. I am not trying to steal. I am trying to return. Take it. Be at peace. Her horrifying face was inches from mine. Her dead eyes stared into my soul, searching. The rage in them faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. And then, a wave of grief so profound it almost stopped my heart. A single, luminescent tear, looking like a drop of liquid moonlight, detached from her eye and dissolved into the dark water. Her long, decayed fingers reached out, not to claw at me, but to gently, reverently, take the comb from the hook. As her fingers closed around it, a soft light pulsed from the comb, enveloping her. Her form began to change. The bloated, monstrous features softened. The tattered kimono became whole and white again. The tangled mess of her hair smoothed into a sheet of black silk.
For a fleeting second, she was the beautiful, heartbroken girl from the legend, clutching her treasured possession to her chest. She looked at me one last time, and in her eyes, there was no longer rage or hunger. There was only a quiet, sad gratitude. Then, she and the comb dissolved, not into nothingness, but into a million tiny motes of light that twinkled and then faded into the black water. The pressure in the water vanished. The unnatural cold receded. The skeletons settled back into the mud, becoming inert once more. My lungs gave out. Black spots danced in my vision. My last conscious thought was a desperate pull on the rope around my waist. I awoke on the floor of the rowboat, coughing up gallons of foul-tasting lake water. I was shivering violently, my skin blue with cold. The fog was gone. The moon was high in the sky, its light clear and bright on the water. The lake was just a lake again, still and silent, but no longer menacing. The presence was gone. I rowed back to shore on trembling arms, my ordeal feeling more like a hallucination than a memory. Mr. Sato was waiting for me on the dock, a thick blanket and a flask of hot tea in his hands. He said nothing. He didn't need to. He simply helped me back to the inn and put me to bed. I left the next day. I had my photos, the ones Dave wanted. The swan boats, the mountain, the shrine. Postcards of peace. But I had other photos too, burned not onto a memory card, but onto my soul. The image of a face in the water, the sight of a boneyard in an impossible abyss, the feeling of a sorrow so deep it could bend reality. The official story of Lake Haruna is one of beauty, but I know the truth. I know that if you go there, and you stand by the shore at twilight, and you listen very, very closely, you might still hear the echo of a whisper on the wind. I know that while Akane may have found her peace, the abyss she created remains. Because a bottomless lake is not a geologic feature. It is a hole in the world, left by a bottomless heart. And such places, they never truly fill.
Story: The Tunnel Where Time Bleeds. There are places in this world, etched into the landscape like scars, where the veil between what is and what was wears dangerously thin. These are not grand Gothic castles or sprawling infamous asylums. More often, they are quiet, forgotten corners of the earth, an overgrown path, a derelict farmhouse, or, in this case, a gaping maw of brick and darkness, bored through the heart of a Japanese mountain. This is the story of the Usui Tunnel, but it is not the story you will find in guidebooks or historical archives. This is the story whispered in hushed tones, the one that tells you why some places are best left to the ghosts that claim them. Our story begins not in the mists of the Meiji era, when the tunnel was first clawed from the living rock, but in the glaring, digital present. It begins with four people, four young Americans drawn to the magnetic pull of Japan, seeking authenticity beyond the neon glow of Tokyo and the manicured temples of Kyoto. There was Kenji, or Ken, as his friends called him. He was the anchor of the group, a half-Japanese, half-American linguistics student from California. He carried the quiet burden of a dual heritage, fluent in the nuances of both cultures, but feeling fully at home in neither. It was his subtle understanding of Japan's unspoken rules and hidden sorrows that would later prove to be both a guide and a curse. Then there was Liam, a freelance photographer with an insatiable appetite for the arcane. He was the catalyst. It was Liam who, while scouring obscure urban exploration forums, first stumbled upon the legend of Usui Toga Daisan Kyoryo, the third bridge of the Usui Pass, and its infamous tunnel. For him, the world was a collection of frames, and the story of a haunted railway tunnel where time itself was said to falter was the perfect, chilling composition.
Chloe was the sensitive one, an art history major with an empathic soul that seemed to register the emotional residue of a place long after the events had passed. She saw beauty where others saw decay, but she also felt a chill where others felt only a breeze.
Her friends often teased her for being a human barometer for the supernatural. And finally, there was Maya, the pragmatist. A doctoral candidate in modern Japanese history, she was the skeptic, the voice of reason. For her, the Usui Tunnel was a fascinating relic of the Meiji Restoration, a testament to Japan's frantic, often brutal modernization. The ghosts, she argued, were merely metaphors for the national trauma of that era. She was there for the history, not the horror. It was a crisp weekend in late October when Liam, his eyes alight with a feverish excitement, presented his plan. "Forget Nico, guys. I found something better, something real." He turned his laptop around, displaying a grainy photo of a brick archway swallowed by autumn foliage. The Usui Tunnel, part of the old App System railway line, abandoned since the 60s. They say time stops inside. People go in for 5 minutes and come out and hours have passed. Or they go in for hours and come out and it's only been a few minutes. "And it's haunted, I presume?" Maya said, a wry smile playing on her lips as she adjusted her glasses. "Let me guess, a woman in a white kimono?" "Close," Liam grinned. "A girl in a white dress. And sometimes a man's face appears in your rearview mirror if you drive through the nearby modern tunnel. But this one is on foot. No cars. Just you, the darkness, and 100 years of misery." Kenji felt a prickle of unease, a feeling he couldn't quite name. It was the familiar dissonance he often felt when Western thrill-seeking met Eastern sorrow. In America, a ghost story was entertainment. In Japan, it was a warning, a sign of unresolved pain, a tear in the fabric of the community that had never properly healed.
It was built in the 1890s, he said quietly, translating some of the Japanese text on the forum. The work was brutal. Many laborers died, accidents, exhaustion, disease. They say their bodies were sealed within the walls. Chloe shivered, wrapping her arms around herself. "That's horrible." "It's history," Maya corrected, though her voice lacked its usual academic confidence. "Tragic, but it's the cost of progress. The app system was a marvel of engineering, the first of its kind in Japan. It connected Tokyo to the coast. It changed everything. And now we're going to go poke it with a stick," Liam declared, clapping his hands together. "It'll be an adventure. We'll leave Saturday morning, be there by noon. A quick walk through the tunnel, some killer photos, and we're back in Tokyo for dinner." Against Kenji's better judgment and Chloe's palpable apprehension, the plan was set. The allure of the unknown, packaged as a weekend adventure, was too strong to resist. They had no idea that they weren't just planning a trip to a forgotten piece of infrastructure. They were making an appointment with a place that had been waiting, patiently, in the dark. The drive to Gunma Prefecture was deceptively beautiful. The urban sprawl of Tokyo bled into rolling hills painted in the fiery hues of autumn. The air grew cleaner, colder. As they ascended into the mountains surrounding Karuizawa, a place of serene beauty and old money, the modern world seemed to peel away, layer by layer.
They parked near the trail leading to the old railway line, now a designated hiking path called the Apt Road. The initial part of the walk was charming. The path followed the gentle grade of the former tracks, flanked by forests of Japanese maple and cedar. The sun, low in the afternoon sky, cast long, dappled shadows across their path. They passed other hikers, families, elderly couples, all enjoying the crisp mountain air. "See? Perfectly normal," Maya said, breathing in deeply. "It's beautiful up here. A monument to Meiji ingenuity." But as they walked further, the crowds thinned. The path grew wilder. The cheerful birdsong seemed to be replaced by the lonely rustle of leaves and the mournful sigh of the wind through the pines. They were approaching the section of the line famous for its bridges and tunnels, engineering marvels that had cost an uncounted number of lives. They came upon the third bridge first. It was a magnificent, soaring structure of red brick, an elegant Romanesque arch straddling a deep, wooded gorge. It was breathtakingly beautiful and profoundly sad. Liam was in his element, snapping photos from every conceivable angle, while Chloe stood near the edge, her gaze lost in the chasm below. "You can feel it, can't you?" she whispered to Kenji, who had come to stand beside her. "Feel what?" he asked, though he knew the answer. The air here felt heavy, freighted with an invisible weight. "The work," she said, her voice barely audible. "The sheer effort, the pain. It's soaked into the bricks." They pressed on. The entrance to the third tunnel, the infamous Usui Tunnel, appeared before them suddenly. a perfect black semicircle cut into the mountainside. It didn't look like an entrance. It looked like a mouth. The meticulously laid bricks, now dark with age and creeping moss, resembled weathered teeth. A stone plaque at the side, its characters faded, named it simply Tunnel Number 3. The cheerfulness of their expedition evaporated completely. An unnatural silence descended, so profound that the dripping of water from within the tunnel sounded like a drumbeat. A cold, damp air, smelling of wet earth, stone, and something else. Something metallic and vaguely organic, like old blood, poured from the dark maw. "Well, this is it," Liam said, his voice a little too loud in the oppressive quiet. He slung his camera around his neck and flicked on a powerful flashlight. The beam cut a bright, lonely cone into the absolute blackness, but seemed to be swallowed by it only 100 feet in. "Who's first?" Maya, ever the pragmatist, switched on her phone's flashlight. "It's just a tunnel, about 500 meters long according to the map. A 10-minute walk max. Let's get this over with." But Chloe was frozen, her face pale. "I don't want to go in." "Chloe, don't be silly," Liam chided gently. "It's just dark and spooky, that's the whole point." "No," she insisted, her eyes wide and fixed on the entrance. "It's not just spooky, it feels wrong. It feels full." Kenji felt it too. A deep, primal instinct screamed at him to turn back. This was a yabai basho, a dangerous place, a place where the rules of the living did not apply. He could almost hear his grandmother's voice, warning him about places where spirits, the yurei, are trapped by injustice or sorrow. "Maybe we should listen to her," Kenji suggested, looking at Liam. "We got the photos of the bridge. That's good enough." "No way," Liam shot back, his adventurous spirit overriding all caution. "We came all this way. I'm not backing down because of a bad vibe. Look, I'll go first." Before anyone could stop him, Liam stepped across the invisible threshold, plunging into the darkness. His flashlight beam danced erratically for a moment before steadying. "See? Nothing. Just cold and wet. Come on." Reluctantly, with Maya sighing in exasperation and Kenji casting one last look at the sunlit world behind them, they followed. Chloe was the last to enter, her hand gripping the back of Kenji's jacket like a lifeline. The moment they were all inside, the world changed. It wasn't just the drop in temperature, which was so sudden and severe, it felt like stepping into a walk-in freezer. It was the sound. The instant Chloe crossed the threshold, the entrance seemed to seal itself with a curtain of silence. The sounds of the forest, the wind, the leaves, the distant birds, vanished completely. All that remained was the rhythmic drip, drip, drip of water from the vaulted ceiling and the sound of their own shuffling feet and ragged breaths, which seemed unnervingly loud in the vacuum. "My watch stopped," Maya said, her voice tight with confusion. She tapped the glass face of her elegant analog watch. The second hand was motionless. "That's odd. The battery must have died." Kenji pulled out his phone. The screen was black. "Mine too. Dead. No signal, and the clock is frozen," Liam reported, checking his own phone. 3:47 p.m. Weird. "It's probably some kind of magnetic interference from the rock," Maya reasoned, though her voice wavered. "That can happen in mountains." They walked deeper. The tunnel was a perfect tube of oppressive darkness, broken only by their 3 cones of light. The brickwork was a marvel of uniformity, each brick laid with a precision that spoke of immense labor. In the dancing beams of their lights, Kenji noticed dark, rust-colored stains seeping from the mortar in some places, looking disturbingly like old wounds. Chloe began to whimper softly. "They're watching us." "Who's watching us, Chloe?" Liam asked, his patience wearing thin. "I don't know," she sobbed. "Everyone." It was then that Kenji heard it. Faintly beneath the dripping water was another sound, a soft, sibilant whisper that seemed to come from the walls themselves. He couldn't make out the words, but the feeling they carried was unmistakable. A chorus of misery. He strained to listen, his Japanese fluency kicking in. "Seimui, itai, cold, it hurts. Kairitai, I want to go home." "Did you guys hear that?" he asked, stopping in his tracks. "Hear what? The dripping?" Maya asked, her light sweeping nervously from side to side. "No!" Whispering. In Japanese. Liam laughed, a hollow, nervous sound that didn't echo properly. It just died in the thick air.
It's the wind, man, or an acoustic anomaly. You're letting the stories get to you. But Kenji knew it wasn't the wind. The air was unnervingly still. He shone his light down the tunnel. The exit was not yet visible. It felt like they had been walking for 15 minutes, yet they should have been able to see the pinprick of light by now. The tunnel seemed to be stretching ahead of them, elongating itself into infinity. The time stop legend suddenly felt terrifyingly real. Liam, ever the photographer, was trying to capture the oppressive atmosphere. He raised his camera and pointed it into the darkness ahead. He focused, and as he looked through the viewfinder, he gasped and stumbled backward, dropping the camera. It clattered onto the damp ground. "Liam, what is it?" Maya cried out. He was pale, his eyes wide with terror. In the camera, I saw a face, just for a second, at the far end of the tunnel. It was a trick of the light, Maya insisted, though she was now clutching Chloe's arm. "No," Liam stammered, his voice shaking. "It wasn't, it was a man. His face was gaunt, dirty. His eyes, God, his eyes were just screaming." Kenji's blood ran cold. He picked up the camera and shone his light on it. The lens was intact. He switched it on and aimed it down the tunnel. Through the digital screen, the darkness seemed deeper, more textured. He saw nothing but brick and shadow. "There's nothing there, Liam." "It was there," he insisted, his voice rising to a near hysterical pitch. It was in that moment of distraction that Chloe let out a piercing shriek. A real, blood-curdling scream that was brutally cut short by the sound-dampening air. She was pointing a trembling finger towards the entrance they had come from. "She's there!" Kenji and Maya whipped their lights around. For a split second, framed in the dark archway far behind them, they saw her. A small figure, standing perfectly still. A girl, in what looked like a simple, light-colored dress. She was too far away to see any detail, but her presence was a violation, an impossibility. "Who the hell is that?" Maya breathed, her skepticism finally shattering into a million pieces. As soon as they had all seen her, the figure vanished, not by running or walking away. She was simply there one moment and gone the next, as if a switch had been flipped. Panic set in. "Okay, that's it, we're leaving," Kenji said, his voice firm, taking charge. "We walk. Fast. Do not run. We stay together. Liam, get a grip. Maya, keep your light on the path ahead. Chloe, stay right behind me." They turned and began to power walk towards the exit, a unified front of terror. The whispers Kenji had heard before were now louder, a cacophony of suffering that seemed to claw at the edges of his hearing. "Kurushi," agonizing, "Tasukete, help me." The air grew even colder, a biting, unnatural chill that penetrated their jackets and settled deep in their bones. The smell of rust and decay intensified, now mingled with the faint, foul odor of sweat and sickness. They walked for what felt like an eternity. The tunnel remained a perfect, unending black tube. The pinprick of light that should have been their salvation refused to appear. It was a physical manifestation of a nightmare, a corridor with no end. "It's not getting closer," Liam panted, his voice ragged with fear. "The exit isn't getting any closer." "It has to," Maya yelled back, her composure gone, replaced by raw panic. "It's only 500 meters. It's playing with us," Chloe sobbed. "It doesn't want us to leave." Then Kenji's light caught something on the wall to his right. He stopped, aiming the beam directly at it. It was a handprint. A small, muddy handprint, pressed into the brick. But the mud was mixed with something dark red that had run down the wall in a single grotesque tear. As he stared, another handprint appeared next to it, slowly materializing out of the damp brick as if being pressed from the other side. He pulled his light away with a gasp. This place wasn't just haunted, it was alive. The tunnel itself was the monster, a vast, brick-lined gullet, and they were being slowly digested. Suddenly, a new sound joined the chorus of whispers. The soft, rhythmic patter of bare feet on wet ground. It was coming from behind them. "Don't look back," Kenji commanded, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Whatever you do, don't look back."
Just walk faster. But the pattering grew louder, closer. It was a light, quick sound, the sound of a child running. Liam couldn't take it. With a strangled cry, he spun around, sweeping his flashlight beam back down the tunnel. She was there. Not at the entrance anymore, but halfway down the tunnel, standing not 50 feet from them, the girl in the white dress. His flashlight illuminated her in horrifying detail. The dress wasn't pristine white. It was a grubby, tattered garment, stained with mud and what looked like rust. Her feet were bare and caked in grime. Her long black hair hung in wet, stringy clumps around her face, obscuring her features. She just stood there, perfectly still, her head slightly bowed. For a moment, nobody moved, nobody breathed. The universe seemed to hold its breath. Then, she lifted her head.
There was no face.
Where her eyes, nose, and mouth should have been, there was only a smooth, pale, and utterly featureless expanse of skin, a Naparabo, the faceless ghost of Japanese legend. The collective scream from the four of them was swallowed by the suffocating silence. It was a scream of pure animal terror, the sound of minds breaking under an impossible reality. As if their terror were a trigger, the girl began to move towards them. She didn't walk or run. She glided, her feet not seeming to touch the ground, moving with an unnatural, jerky speed, like a corrupted video file. She closed the distance with terrifying rapidity. It was Liam who broke first. He did the only thing he knew how to do. He raised his camera, fumbling with the buttons. "I have to get a picture," he muttered, a mad gleam in his eyes. "No one will believe us." "Liam, no," Kenji screamed. The camera's flash went off, a brilliant, blinding strobe of white light that illuminated the entire tunnel for a single, eternal second. And in that flash, they saw the truth. They weren't alone with the girl. The walls were lined with figures, dozens of them, the gaunt, spectral forms of men, their bodies translucent, their faces twisted in masks of eternal agony, their eyes black pits of despair. They were packed shoulder to shoulder, their spectral bodies partially merged with the brickwork itself. The builders, the dead, the souls trapped within the walls. The tunnel was not a tunnel. It was a tomb, a mass grave. And the girl was now right in front of them, her featureless face just inches from Liam's. The flash died, plunging them back into the focused beams of their lights. But the after-image was burned into their retinas, a tableau of hell itself. The girl opened a mouth that hadn't been there a second before, a black, weeping slit in her blank face, and let out a silent, soul-shattering scream. That broke the spell. Pure, instinctual flight took over. They turned and ran, a blind, clumsy stampede into the darkness ahead. They tripped, they stumbled, they scraped their hands against the weeping brick walls, but they didn't stop. The whispers were now a roaring torrent in their ears, a tidal wave of a century's worth of pain. Cold spots washed over them, the touch of spectral hands brushing against their necks, their arms, their faces.
And then, a miracle. A tiny, perfect circle of light appeared in the distance. The exit. It was impossibly far, but it was there. It was real. With renewed desperation, they scrambled towards it, their lungs burning, tears of terror streaming down their faces. The darkness seemed to fight them, to pull them back, the very air thick and heavy like water. They burst out of the tunnel and into the late afternoon sun, collapsing onto the gravel path in a heaving, sobbing pile. They gasped for air, the clean, crisp mountain breeze a shocking balm after the stagnant foulness of the tunnel. The sun felt like a physical blessing on their skin. The sound of the wind in the trees was the most beautiful music they had ever heard. They lay there for a long time, their bodies shaking uncontrollably. Finally, Kenji pushed himself up. His hands were raw, his jeans were torn at the knee, but he was alive. He was outside. He looked at his phone. The screen flickered to life. The signal bars were full. He looked at the time. 3:57 p.m. He stared at it.
his mind refusing to process the information. He looked at Maya, who was staring at her own ticking watch with an expression of blank disbelief. 10 minutes, she whispered, her voice a hollow rasp. We were in there for 10 minutes. It had felt like a lifetime. An eternity trapped in a cold, dark hell. But in the world of the living, only 10 minutes had passed. The legend was true. Time in the Usui tunnel did not just stop. It bled. It warped. It obeyed a set of rules authored by misery. With a final, dreadful compulsion, Kenji forced himself to turn and look back at the tunnel entrance. The dark maw was just as they had left it, silent and foreboding. And for a heartbreaking second, he saw her again. The girl in the tattered dress, standing just inside the shadow of the archway. She was no longer faceless. For a fleeting instant, he saw the face of a young, terrified girl. Her eyes filled not with malice, but with a profound and bottomless sorrow. She was not a monster. She was a prisoner. Then she faded, and there was only darkness.
They never spoke of what happened in the tunnel. Not in detail. There were no words to adequately describe the suffocating terror, the violation of natural law, the searing image from the camera's flash. Liam's camera was ruined. The memory card was wiped clean, corrupted beyond recovery. All he had were his photos of the beautiful sunlit bridge and a single final file that was just a block of solid black. Maya abandoned her doctoral thesis on Meiji-era industrialization. She could no longer look at history as a set of academic facts. She had touched its raw, screaming nerve. Chloe was haunted by nightmares for years. She would wake up screaming, clawing at her own face, trying to erase the memory of the featureless ghost. And Kenji felt the deepest change of all. He felt a sorrow that was not his own, a connection to the whispers in the dark. He understood that they hadn't been attacked by a monster. They had trespassed into a monument of pain, a wound in time that had never been allowed to heal. The spirits in the tunnel weren't trying to harm them. They were trying to be heard, to share their unending agony with the first people who were able to listen.
The Usui tunnel still stands, a silent testament to a forgotten age. Hikers still walk the apt road, admiring the stoic beauty of the brickwork, perhaps feeling a momentary chill as they pass its dark entrance before continuing on their way. They do not know that they are walking past a place where time is broken, where the screams of the dead are woven into the very fabric of the stones. They do not know that some places are not merely empty spaces, but containers, filled to the brim with the echoes of a past that refuses to die. And some echoes, as four terrified people discovered, are loud enough to shatter your world. The unending litany of Shakunaje Monastery. Some places are not meant to be found. They exist on the fraying edges of maps, in the hushed whispers of online forums dedicated to the macabre, and in the cold, hollow spaces of memory. They are wounds on the landscape, festering with stories that refuse to die. The Shakunaja Monastery, nestled deep in the unforgiving mountains of Japan, is one such place, and I, to my eternal regret, am one of the few who found it and lived to tell the tale. Though sometimes I wonder if living is the right word for what I do now. My name is Kenji Tanaka. I was born in Los Angeles to Japanese parents, a product of two cultures, but a master of none. I made my living as a photographer, not the kind that shoots glossy weddings or pristine landscapes, but the kind that seeks out decay. Urban exploration, or haikyo, as it's called in Japan, was my obsession. I was drawn to the beauty in abandonment, the peeling paint, the rust-eaten machinery, the silent testament to lives once lived. It was a search for ghosts, but not literal ones. I was a skeptic, a firm believer in rust, rot, and rational explanations. The only spirits I chased were the echoes of history frozen in a single frame. That all changed with Rio.
I met him, predictably, on a forum called Urbex Uncovered. He was a legend in the community. While most of us were exploring abandoned pachinko parlors and love hotels on the outskirts of Tokyo, Rio was chasing phantoms. His posts were different. They were less about the architecture and more about the feeling. He wrote of cold spots in deserted hospitals, of disembodied footsteps in shuttered schools. He was a true believer, and his grail, the one he spoke of in reverent, almost fearful tones, was the Shakunaje Monastery.
The legend was sparse but potent. A remote Zen Buddhist monastery that was abandoned overnight in the late 1970s. No records, no forwarding address for the monks, no official explanation. They just vanished. The local villagers, a dwindling population of elderly farmers, spoke of it in fearful whispers. They claimed the head monk had delved into forbidden practices, esoteric sutras that were meant to bridge the world of the living and the dead, not for peace, but for power. The story went that he succeeded, but the door he opened could not be closed. After the monks disappeared, locals who ventured too close to the mountain path reported hearing something that chilled them to the bone. The low, monotonous drone of chanting, carried on the wind from the empty monastery. A litany that never ceased, day or night. For Rio, this was the ultimate haikyo. For me, it was the ultimate myth to debunk. A ghost story born from a town's collective fear of the unknown, amplified by the wind whistling through broken paper screens. I saw the photographic potential. Serene, decaying Buddhist iconography juxtaposed with the harshness of nature reclaiming its own. Rio assembled our team. Besides him and me, there was Haru, our tech and audio guy. Haru was even more of a skeptic than I was. He was a sound engineer by trade, a man who believed every creak and groan had a source, and he came armed with a small studio's worth of equipment to prove it. Parabolic microphones, EMF detectors, thermal cameras, and digital recorders that could pick up a pin drop in a concert hall. His goal was to capture the chanting and break it down into its component parts. Wind, animal calls, the resonant frequency of decaying wood. The final member was Emmy. She was Rio's girlfriend, a quiet, sensitive art student who claimed to have a receptiveness to places like this. I called it a hyperactive imagination. Rio called it a gift. She was our canary in the coal mine, he'd said with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. I just saw her as a liability, someone whose predictable fear would only feed Rio's narrative.
We set off on a crisp autumn weekend. The drive itself was a descent into another time. We left the glittering, hypermodern sprawl of Tokyo behind, and the landscape gradually softened into rolling hills, then sharpened into jagged, pine-choked mountains. The towns grew smaller, the buildings older. We stopped for supplies in the last village before the mountain pass, a place that felt preserved in amber. The air was thick, with the smell of wood smoke and damp earth. When Rio, in his clumsy, city-dweller Japanese, asked an old shopkeeper for directions to the path leading towards Shakunage, the woman's face closed like a fist. She sold us our water and rice balls, but her eyes were cold granite. She muttered a single word as we left. Yamenasai. Stop. Don't. The warning only fueled Rio's excitement. They know, he whispered, his eyes gleaming. They know it's still active. The road ended abruptly, dissolving into a dirt track barely wide enough for our van. We parked and began the hike. The path was steep and treacherous, reclaimed by gnarled roots and slick moss. The forest was unnervingly silent. No birdsong, no rustle of animals in the undergrowth. The only sound was our own labored breathing and the crunch of our boots on dead leaves. The air grew colder, heavy with a strange, metallic tang, like old blood or ozone before a storm. Emmy was the first to feel it. She stopped, her face pale, and wrapped her arms around herself. "It feels heavy here," she murmured, "like the air is thick with sorrow." Haru scoffed, tapping a gauge on one of his devices. "It's a pressure drop. We're gaining altitude, basic meteorology."
But I felt it too. A weight. A sense of being watched by 1,000 unseen eyes. I raised my camera, trying to ground myself in the familiar process of framing a shot. But the images in my viewfinder looked flat, lifeless, as if the forest itself refused to be captured. After 2 hours of grueling hiking, we saw it. The gate, a massive, weather-beaten wooden structure, its timbers sagging, a heavy tile roof green with moss. The name, Shakunagi-ji, was carved into a plaque, the characters faded but still legible. It wasn't menacing. It was just sad, a forgotten relic. "We're here," Ryo breathed, his voice filled with a reverence that bordered on religious. The gate was unlocked, its hinges groaning in protest as we pushed it open. The grounds within were a chaotic tableau of nature's victory. A stone garden was now a riot of weeds, its carefully raked patterns lost to time. Stone lanterns lay toppled, their paper screens long since rotted away. The main temple building, the Hondo, stood at the center, its elegant curved roofline somehow still intact, a dark silhouette against the graying sky. Surrounding it were smaller auxiliary buildings, what looked like dormitories, a kitchen, and a bell tower, its great bronze bell hanging silent. "Okay," Haru announced, setting down his heavy pack. "Let's establish a base camp here, in the courtyard. We'll sweep the buildings before dusk. Kenji, get your establishing shots. Emmy, you. Stick close. Ryo, try not to get possessed before I get my gear set up." His attempt at humor fell flat. The oppressive atmosphere of the place was a physical thing now, pressing in on us. We decided to explore the main hall first. The great wooden doors were stuck fast. It took the combined effort of me and Ryo to shoulder them open, the sound of splintering wood echoing like a gunshot in the profound silence. The interior was pitch black and smelled of decay, damp tatami, and something else. Something cloyingly sweet and resinous. Incense. But the scent wasn't stale. It was sharp, as if it had been burned recently. Haru switched on a powerful flashlight, its beam cutting through the gloom and illuminating a universe of dancing dust motes. The main hall was vast. Tatami mats, torn and moldy, covered the floor. At the far end, on a raised dais, sat a large gilded statue of the Buddha, its serene face covered in a thick shroud of cobwebs. Its hands were held in a mudra of teaching, but in the gloom it looked more like a gesture of warning. Offerings of fruit and rice, now petrified and black with mold, sat in dusty bowls before it. "Incredible," I whispered, raising my camera. This was the shot, the serene face of enlightenment consumed by the slow, inexorable rot of the world. I snapped a photo, then another. When I lowered the camera to look at the screen, my blood ran cold. The first photo was perfect, exactly what I saw. In the second photo, taken maybe 2 seconds later, there was something else. A smudge. A dark, vaguely human-shaped blur, standing just to the left of the statue. It wasn't there now. I knew it wasn't. "Guys," I said, my voice hoarse, "look at this." Haru peered at the small screen. Lens flare, or a smudge on your lens, or a shadow from your own flash bouncing off the gold leaf. A dozen rational explanations, Kenji. "I didn't use a flash," I said quietly. Ryo, however, was ecstatic. "It started. I told you. They're aware of us." He was practically vibrating with excitement. Emmy just stared at the spot where the shadow had been, her eyes wide with a terror that felt far more genuine than Ryo's thrill-seeking. "It's not welcoming," she whispered. "It's hungry." We spent the next few hours sweeping the other buildings. The kitchen was a mess of rusted pots and shattered ceramics. In the dormitories, we found the monks' meager possessions left exactly as they were.
Futons were rolled in corners, robes hung on pegs, and in one room, a small table held a calligraphy set, the brush still resting on the inkstone, a half-finished sutra on the yellowed paper. It was as if they had all simply stood up in the middle of their daily lives and walked away. The feeling of sudden, inexplicable departure was overwhelming. As dusk began to bleed purple and orange through the shattered paper screens, we returned to the courtyard. Haru was in his element, setting up his equipment. He placed sensitive microphones in the four corners of the courtyard, ran cables back to a central recording station, and set up a thermal camera pointed at the hundo. "If there's a mouse farting in there, I'll know what it had for dinner," he declared, plugging headphones into his console. We ate a cold meal of rice balls and jerky, the silence of the mountain pressing in. The sun vanished behind the peaks, and the darkness that fell wasn't just an absence of light, it was a presence. The temperature plummeted. I found myself shivering, and it wasn't entirely from the cold. Rio was pacing, too agitated to eat. Emmy sat huddled in a blanket, staring into the darkness of the main hall. I kept looking at the digital image on my camera, zooming in on the dark smudge, trying to convince myself it was nothing.
We waited. The hours ticked by. 10 o'clock, 11. The only sounds were the wind and the frantic thumping of my own heart. Haru, monitoring his equipment, looked bored. "Nothing," he said with a sigh of disappointment. "Not a peep. The wind is creating some low-frequency resonance, around 18 hertz, which can cause feelings of unease and paranoia. That's your heavy feeling, Emmy. Infrasound. Totally normal." Rio looked crestfallen. Even I felt a strange mix of relief and disappointment. Maybe it really was just a story. And then, at the stroke of midnight, I know how cliché that sounds, but it's the God's honest truth, it began. It wasn't loud. It was a low hum, so subtle at first that I thought it was in my own head. A bass note that seemed to vibrate in my teeth. Haru sat bolt upright, his hands flying to his headphones. "Whoa," he breathed. "I'm getting something. A clear signal. Very low frequency." The hum grew, resolving itself into a distinct sound. It was a voice, a single, male voice, chanting in a deep, guttural monotone. It was a Buddhist sutra, but the cadence was wrong. It was flat, devoid of life or spirit, like a recording on a loop. Om Mani Padme Hum. The sound wasn't coming from any single direction. It was everywhere at once. It was in the air, in the ground, in the very marrow of our bones. "Where is it coming from?" Rio demanded, spinning around, his eyes wild.
"I don't know," Haru stammered, his scientific composure shattering. "It's on all four channels. Equal strength. That's impossible. It's like the source is everywhere." He frantically checked his thermal camera. Nothing. No heat signatures. Just cold stone. Then a second voice joined the first. Then a third, and a fourth. Within a minute, the air was filled with the sound of a dozen, maybe more, men chanting in perfect, soulless unison. The sound grew in volume, a droning, inescapable wall of noise. It was the most terrifying sound I have ever heard. It wasn't angry or menacing, it was empty. It was the sound of a ritual stripped of all meaning, repeated for eternity by something that had forgotten why it had started. Emmy let out a small, choked sob and pressed her hands over her ears. But it was useless. The sound wasn't just something you heard, it was something you felt. It bypassed the ears and drilled directly into the skull. My skepticism, my carefully constructed fortress of logic, crumbled into dust. This wasn't the wind, this wasn't infrasound, this was real. I grabbed my camera, my hands shaking so violently I could barely hold it steady. I pointed it towards the dark maw of the hondo and started shooting, the flash momentarily bleaching the scene in stark, terrifying detail. In the blinding strobe, for a split second, I thought I saw them. Silhouettes, dozens of them, seated in neat rows on the tatami mats, their heads bowed, their forms indistinct and wavering like heat haze. Then the flash would fade, and there was only darkness. "They're in there," I screamed over the din. "They're all in there." Haru, white as a sheet, was yelling into his comms. "It's a clean audio signal, no distortion, no atmospheric interference. It's like they're plugged directly into my board."
But there's nothing there.
The chanting shifted. The monotonous drone began to break, the voices rising in pitch, becoming strained, desperate. It was no longer a prayer. It was a plea, or a warning. The uniform rhythm fractured, voices overlapping, creating a horrifying cacophony. It was the sound of a collective mind unraveling. This is when true panic set in. This wasn't a paranormal investigation anymore. It was a siege. We were trapped in this small courtyard, surrounded by an invisible, screaming choir. Rio, however, was in a state of rapture. "This is it! This is it!" he yelled, his face illuminated by the screen of his phone, which he was using to record. "The eternal ritual! We're witnessing it!" He started walking towards the Hondo, as if drawn by a siren's call. "Rio, no!" I yelled, grabbing his arm. His skin was ice cold. He wrenched his arm away, his eyes vacant. "I have to see. I have to be a part of it." Suddenly, the great bronze bell in the tower let out a single, deafening boom, a sound so powerful it shook the very ground. There was no wind. No one was near it. It rang with a resonance that felt ancient and final. At the sound of the bell, the chanting stopped. The silence that followed was more terrifying than the noise. It was a vacuum, absolute and profound. It felt like the world was holding its breath. And in that silence, we heard a new sound, a soft, wet, shuffling noise. It was coming from inside the main hall. Haru had his parabolic mic pointed at the doorway. His eyes were wide with a terror that I will never forget. "Oh God," he whispered, ripping his headphones off. "Oh my God, Kenji, it's not a chant anymore." "What is it?" I asked, my voice a dry rasp. "It's one voice," he said, his body trembling. "It's whispering. It's whispering our names." That broke us. "We have to go, now!" I screamed, grabbing my pack. Emmy was catatonic, curled in a ball on the ground, shaking uncontrollably. Rio was still staring at the temple, a look of blissful horror on his face. "Leave the gear!" I yelled at Haru. "Just grab the recordings and let's go." I hauled Emmy to her feet. She was like a doll, her limbs unresponsive. I half dragged, half carried her towards the main gate. Haru, stuffing his recorder into his jacket, was right behind me. "Rio, come on!" I screamed back. He didn't move. He just stood there, a silhouette against the black void of the temple doorway. "It's so beautiful," he whispered. From the darkness of the Hondo, a shape emerged. It wasn't one of the monks I thought I'd seen. It was tall and unnaturally thin, its limbs too long, its movements jerky and wrong. It was made of shadow, a tear in the fabric of the night. It glided across the courtyard towards Rio, the wet, shuffling sound getting closer. There was no time. I made a choice I will have to live with for the rest of my life. I left him. I shoved Emmy ahead of me and ran with Haru, not daring to look back. We burst through the main gate and plunged into the darkness of the forest path, running blindly, fueled by pure adrenaline. Branches whipped at our faces, roots threatened to trip us at every step. Behind us, from the monastery, Rio let out a single, ecstatic scream that was cut off with a sickening wet crunch. Then the chanting started again. But this time it was different. It was faster, hungrier, and it was following us. It wasn't just in our heads anymore. It was in the trees, the rocks, the very air around us. We could hear it moving through the forest, keeping pace with us just beyond the tree line. We ran for what felt like an eternity, sobbing and gasping for air. Emmy stumbled and fell. I picked her up, my own lungs burning, my legs screaming in protest. The path seemed to stretch on forever, the trees twisting into monstrous shapes in the gloom. The chanting was getting closer, the individual voices clearer, whispering obscenities and promises in a language that was almost Japanese but horribly corrupted. We finally burst out of the woods and onto the dirt track where we had parked the van. Fumbling with the keys, my hands slick with sweat, I finally got the door open. We threw ourselves inside and I slammed the gas pedal to the floor. The van fishtailed on the dirt before finding purchase, and we sped away, leaving the silent, watching mountain behind us. We didn't speak for the entire drive back to Tokyo. Haru stared out the window, his face a mask of shock. Emmy was curled in the back seat, shivering and muttering to herself. I drove on autopilot, the hellish, droning chant still echoing in my mind. The aftermath was worse in some ways than the event itself. We never saw Rio again. A police report was filed. They organized a search party, but the local authorities were reluctant. They found our abandoned campsite, Haru's expensive equipment untouched. They found the van's tire tracks. They found no sign of Rio.
He had vanished, just like the monks. Emmy was never the same. She refused to speak about what happened. She dropped out of art school and was institutionalized a few months later. The last time I visited her, she was sitting in a sterile white room, rocking back and forth, humming a single monotonous note under her breath. Haru became a recluse. The sound engineer who loved to dissect and understand noise was now terrified of silence. He lives in a small apartment with the TV on at all times. He tried to analyze the audio he'd recorded. He told me the files were corrupted, all of them. When he plays them back, there is nothing but static. But sometimes, he says, late at night, when the city is quiet, he can hear it in the hiss of the white noise. A low, familiar drone. And me, I have the photographs. Most of them are just blurry shots of darkness. But one of them, the one from the Hondo, is clear. When I load it onto my computer and blow it up, I can see the smudge next to the Buddha statue is not a smudge. It has a shape. It is the desiccated, emaciated figure of a monk in Zazen meditation, his face a rictus of eternal concentration, his eye sockets empty and dark. And behind him, in the deeper shadows, there are more.
I can't do urban exploration anymore. I can't be in quiet places. The silence is never truly silent. If I listen closely, I can still hear it. The unending litany of Shakunaga Monastery. It's fainter now, a ghost on the edge of my hearing, but it's there. I believe the monks never left. They found what they were looking for, a bridge to something else. But it was a one-way door. They are trapped there, forced to perform their ritual, not for enlightenment, but as a cage. Their chanting is the spiritual bars of a prison, meant to contain the thing they woke up. The thing that took Rio. The shuffling, whispering shadow. And the most terrifying part is this. Every so often, when I hear the chanting in my mind, I think I can distinguish a new voice among the chorus. One that is higher pitched, filled with a terrible, misplaced joy. One that sounds chillingly familiar. One that sounds like Rio. He didn't just die there. He joined them. He became another note in their eternal, damned song. Story: The Ghost of Mount Akagi. The old roads of Japan hold memories. They are carved into the flesh of the land, winding through ancient cedar forests and over mountains that have watched centuries of human folly unfold. Some roads are just asphalt and paint, conduits for commerce and convenience. But others are different. They are veins of a darker, more patient earth. They remember the blood spilled upon them, the tears that have soaked into their gravel shoulders, and the whispers that linger in the fog. The roads of Gunma Prefecture's Mount Akagi are of this second kind, and on one moonless night in late summer, a young man named Kenji Tanaka would learn this truth in the most chilling way imaginable. Kenji was a creature of Tokyo. He thrived on the electric hum of the city, the relentless pulse of Shinjuku, the stylish indifference of Shibuya. His world was one of concrete, steel, and neon, a symphony of controlled chaos he had mastered. He was 21, a university student studying economics, and he viewed his hometown of Maebashi, nestled at the foot of Mount Akagi, with a kind of affectionate condescension. It was a place of quiet streets, sleepy traditions, and, to his city slicker eyes, profound boredom. He was only back for Obon, the festival of the ancestors. His mother had insisted. "It's important, Kenji," she'd said over the phone, her voice laced with that unique blend of guilt and love only a mother can wield. "Your grandfather's spirit will be visiting. You must be here to honor him." So he had come. He'd bowed his head at the family altar, the butsudan, choked down his grandmother's oversweet ohagi, and endured the endless questions from relatives about his fancy Tokyo life. By the third day, the tranquility he once found charming had curdled into a suffocating stillness. He needed to escape. His excuse was a late-night run to a 24-hour convenience store for a specific brand of canned coffee he claimed he couldn't live without. It was a lie, of course. The real reason was his father's car, a well-maintained but decidedly unsporty Toyota sedan, and the serpentine roads of Mount Akagi. The mountain was a local legend,
In the daytime, it was a place of scenic beauty, with its caldera lake and hiking trails. At night, it transformed. The locals spoke of it in hushed tones. They talked of Yurei, the restless dead, and of strange lights that danced between the trees. They especially warned of the Irohazaka, a series of 48 hairpin turns that coiled up the mountainside like a sleeping serpent. It was a notoriously dangerous stretch of road, one that had claimed more than its share of lives over the years. For Kenji, weaned on the aggressive driving of the capital, it was a challenge, a way to blow off steam. He pushed the old sedan harder than it was meant to go. The tires screeched in protest around the tight corners, the headlights cutting a frantic swinging path through a darkness so absolute it felt solid. The air, thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, grew colder as he ascended. The dense canopy of ancient cedars blotted out the stars, creating a claustrophobic tunnel of black. His world shrank to the glowing dashboard, the white lines on the road, and the guttural whine of the engine. He was on the descent, navigating a particularly treacherous series of switchbacks, when he saw her. She was standing on the narrow shoulder of the road, just past the apex of a blind corner, a lone figure bathed in the sudden glare of his high beams. Kenji's foot slammed on the brake, the car lurching to a halt just feet from her. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Who in their right mind would be standing here, in the middle of nowhere, at this hour? It had to be past 1 in the morning. His first thought, a cynical city dweller's instinct, was that it was a trap, a robbery. But then, he got a better look at her. She was young, perhaps his age. She wore a simple white dress, the kind one might wear on a summer afternoon. It seemed impossibly clean, impossibly bright against the oppressive darkness. Her long black hair was a sheet of polished silk, falling over her shoulders. She wasn't carrying a bag or coat, despite the mountain chill that was now seeping into the car. But it was her face that truly arrested him. It was a face of exquisite porcelain beauty, but it was etched with a profound and bottomless sorrow. Her eyes, large and dark, seemed to hold all the tragedy of the world. She just stood there, unmoving, her gaze fixed on him. He sat there for a long moment, engine idling, the tick-tick-tick of the cooling metal sounding unnaturally loud. Every instinct screamed at him to stomp on the gas and leave this strange apparition behind. The local ghost stories, which he'd always dismissed as rural superstition, now clawed at the edges of his consciousness. But he was also a young man, looking at a beautiful, sad girl who appeared to be in trouble. His urban cynicism warred with a more fundamental sense of decency. What if her car had broken down? What if she was lost? Leaving her here seemed cruel, inhuman. He rolled down the passenger window. The cold air rushed in, carrying with it a faint, almost imperceptible scent of lilies. "Hey," he called out, his voice sounding thin and reedy. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" The girl didn't answer immediately. She simply tilted her head, a slow, graceful movement. Then, she took a step toward the car. "I need a ride," she said. Her voice was soft, melodic, yet it seemed to have no echo. It was a sound that was simply there, hanging in the air like smoke. "Can you take me to Maebashi? To the old residential district near the river?" She gave him an address, a specific street and house number. It was a part of town he knew vaguely, a quiet area of older, traditional homes. Kenji hesitated. This was insane. But looking at her, at the sheer vulnerability in her posture, he felt his resolve crumble. "All right," he heard himself say, the word leaving his mouth before he'd fully consented to it. "Get in." She opened the back door and slid onto the seat behind him. The car's interior light flickered on for a moment, illuminating her face once more. He noticed how pale her skin was, almost translucent, like fine china. Then the door clicked shut, plunging them back into the dim glow of the dashboard. "Thank you," she whispered from the back seat. The car seemed to get colder. Kenji turned up the heat, but it did little to dispel the chill that had settled deep in his bones. He pulled back onto the road, driving much more slowly now, his bravado completely evaporated. The silence in the car was heavy, suffocating. He felt an overwhelming urge to fill it. "So, what were you doing all the way up here?" he asked, his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. He could see her reflection, a pale oval in the darkness. "I was waiting," she replied. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion. "Waiting? For who?" "For a kind person."
Her answers were unsettlingly simple, yet they offered no real information. They were like smooth stones, impossible to grasp. He tried again. "Did your car break down?" "I didn't see another vehicle."
"I don't have a car," she said. A long pause, nodding more. Kenji gripped the steering wheel tighter. His knuckles were white. The scent of lilies was stronger now, a sweet, cloying fragrance that reminded him of funerals. He chanced another glance in the rearview mirror. For a split second, a terrifying, heart-stopping second, the seat behind him was empty. He blinked, his heart leaping into his throat, and she was there again. Exactly as before. He must have imagined it. A trick of the light, the shadows, his own frayed nerves. He had to get a grip. "You must be cold," he said, trying to sound casual. "In just that dress." "I don't feel the cold," she answered. They continued their descent in silence, but it wasn't a normal silence. Kenji became acutely aware of every sound, the hum of the tires on the asphalt, the faint rattle of something in the glove compartment, the sound of his own breathing, ragged and shallow. He also became aware of her presence in a way that defied logical explanation. It was more than just knowing someone was in the back seat. He could feel her there, a point of intense cold and sorrow radiating through the car. She seemed to know the road perfectly. "There's a sharp right turn after this long straight," she would say in her soft, whispery voice, moments before the sign for it appeared in his headlights. "Be careful, the shoulder is soft here. A lot of people go too fast." Her preternatural knowledge of the treacherous road was unnerving. It was as if she had driven it 1,000 times, or as if she had become a part of it. As they finally left the mountain's embrace and reached the flatter, straighter roads leading into Maebashi, Kenji started to feel a sliver of relief. The streetlights of the suburbs were a welcome sight, pushing back the primordial darkness. The ordeal was almost over. He would drop her off at the address she'd given, and this bizarre, terrifying encounter would become nothing more than a crazy story to tell his friends back in Tokyo. A story they would never believe. He followed her directions, turning into a labyrinth of quiet, narrow streets. The houses here were old, with traditional tiled roofs and well-tended gardens, sleeping behind stone walls. It was a world away from the neon glow of his life. "It's here," she said, her voice barely a breath.
"The house on the left. The one with the stone lantern in the garden."
Kenji pulled the car over to the curb in front of a handsome, if weathered, traditional home. A heavy, tiled roof sat atop dark wooden walls. In the front garden, a moss-covered stone lantern stood sentinel beside a gnarled pine tree. The house was dark, its inhabitants clearly asleep. "Well, here we are," Kenji said, a wave of relief washing over him. He turned in his seat, ready to say his goodbyes, ready for her to be out of his car, out of his life. "I hope you get home safe." He stopped. The back seat was empty. His blood ran cold. He wasn't blinking this time. He wasn't seeing tricks of the light. She was gone. The door hadn't opened. He would have heard the click and seen the interior light come on. She had simply vanished. Panic, cold and sharp, seized him. He scrambled out of the car, his movements clumsy and frantic. He looked up and down the silent, empty street. There was no one. No white dress fluttering in the darkness. No sound of footsteps. Nothing. He stood there for a full minute, the car's engine idling, his mind refusing to process what had just happened. Had he fallen asleep at the wheel? Had he hallucinated the entire thing? The drive, the girl, the conversation? No, it was too real, too vivid. He could still smell the faint, funereal scent of lilies clinging to the upholstery. And then he saw it. On the back seat, exactly where she had been sitting, was a single, perfect, white camellia blossom. It was slightly damp, as if with dew, and its petals were impossibly pristine. Where had it come from? A new feeling began to replace his panic, a desperate, gnawing need for an explanation, for proof. He looked at the house she had pointed out, the address she had given him. He had to know. His legs felt like lead as he walked up the stone path to the front door. The air was still and heavy. Every step felt like a violation of the deep, sleeping silence of the neighborhood. He stood before the dark wooden door, his hand hovering over the bell. This was crazy. He was about to wake up a family of complete strangers in the middle of the night to ask them about a girl who had disappeared from his car. They would think he was drunk or insane. But the image of her sad eyes, the feeling of the unnatural cold, the impossible sight of the empty back seat, He had to know. He pressed the bell. The chime echoed faintly from within the house. For a long moment, nothing happened. He was about to turn away, to retreat to the safety of his car and forget this ever happened, when a light flickered on inside. He heard the sound of shuffling footsteps, the slide of a bolt. The door opened a few inches. An old man peered out. His face was a road map of wrinkles. His hair, thin and white. He was wearing traditional sleepwear, and his eyes, clouded with age and sleep, blinked at Kenji with confusion. "Yes?" the old man asked, his voice raspy. "Can I help you?"
An elderly woman appeared behind him, her face etched with a similar weary concern. "Is something wrong, dear?" she asked her husband, her gaze falling on Kenji. Kenji's throat was dry. The words wouldn't come. He felt like an idiot, a madman. I'm so sorry to disturb you at this hour," he stammered, bowing his head slightly. "This is going to sound very strange, but I just gave a ride to a young woman. She told me to bring her here, to this address." The old couple exchanged a look. It wasn't a look of annoyance, but of something else, something heavy, a deep, familiar sadness. "A young woman?" the old man said softly, his voice trembling slightly. "Yes," Kenji said, his own voice gaining a desperate urgency. "She was young, my age. She had long black hair and was wearing a white dress. I picked her up on the mountain road, on a kagi." The old woman let out a small gasp, a choked, wounded sound. She brought a trembling hand to her mouth. The old man's face seemed to collapse, all the strength draining from it. He opened the door wider. "Please," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Come in." Hesitantly, Kenji stepped inside. The house was just as traditional on the inside, with tatami mat floors and shoji screen doors. The air smelled of old wood and incense. The old man led him into the main room. In the corner stood a large, ornate butsudan, the family Buddhist altar. It was decorated with fresh flowers and offerings of fruit. And in the center of the altar, in a simple silver frame, was a photograph. Kenji's breath caught in his chest. His heart felt like it had stopped beating. It was her, the girl from the car. The same porcelain face, the same long black hair. In the photograph, however, she was smiling. It was a bright, joyful smile that made the sadness he had seen in her eyes all the more tragic. That's her," Kenji whispered, his voice cracking. "That's the girl." The old woman began to weep silently, her shoulders shaking. The old man put a comforting arm around her, though his own eyes were glistening with unshed tears. "That is our daughter," the old man said, his voice a low, mournful whisper. "Our Yuki." He turned his grief-stricken eyes to Kenji. "Our Yuki died 7 years ago." Kenji felt the floor drop out from under him. He leaned against the wall for support, his mind reeling. 7 years ago? How? He managed to ask, though he already knew the answer. He knew it with a certainty that was as cold and absolute as the grave. "A car accident," the old man said, his voice breaking. "She was coming home from a festival with her friends. They were driving too fast on the mountain, on that winding road, the Irahazaka. The car went off the edge near one of the sharpest turns." He paused, taking a shaky breath. "It happened on this very night. Tonight is the 7th anniversary of her death." The pieces clicked into place in Kenji's mind with the horrifying finality of a coffin lid closing. The white dress, the unnatural cold, the scent of funeral lilies, her intimate knowledge of the road's dangers. "I was waiting for a kind person. I don't have a car. Not anymore." She wasn't a girl who needed a ride home. She was a spirit, a memory, trapped in a loop of her final journey, trying, year after year, to complete the trip she never finished. "Every year on this night," the old woman sobbed, "we hear stories. A truck driver, a young couple, someone always sees her on the mountain. They say she is trying to come home." Kenji stood there, speechless, frozen. The rational, modern world he had so proudly inhabited had been ripped away, revealing a much older, darker, and more mysterious reality beneath. He had chauffeured a ghost. He had spoken with the dead. He thought of the white camellia blossom still resting on the back seat of his father's car, a tangible, impossible piece of evidence, a thank you gift from the other side. He didn't know how long he stayed there, standing in the quiet, grief-filled room. Eventually, he mumbled his apologies and condolences and stumbled back out into the night. The air was no longer just cold. It was filled with a presence, a weight. The silent houses on the street no longer seemed merely asleep. They seemed to be watching him, party to a secret he now shared. He drove home in a daze, the car feeling like a tomb on wheels. He didn't speed, he barely exceeded 20 miles an hour. Every shadow seemed to move, every rustle of leaves sounded like a whisper. He never told his parents what happened. How could he? But something inside him had fundamentally changed. The arrogant, cynical Tokyo student had died that night on the mountain, replaced by someone quieter, more thoughtful, and infinitely more humble. He no longer saw his hometown as a boring backwater. He saw it as a place with deep roots, a place where the veil between worlds was thin, where the past was not just remembered, but actively, tragically present. Kenji Tanaka never drove on Mount Akagi at night again, but sometimes, on a quiet summer evening, when the wind rustles through the trees just right, he can almost smell the faint, sweet scent of lilies. And he remembers the sad-eyed girl in the white dress, the ghost of Mount Akagi, forever trying to find her way home on a road that holds her memory captive. He was the one who finally brought her there. And he knew, with a certainty that would haunt him for the rest of his days, that her gratitude and her sorrow would ride with him forever.
Story: The House That Never Aged, a Takasaki Haunting. There's a concept in architecture I've always been obsessed with: wabi-sabi. It's the Japanese aesthetic of finding beauty in imperfection and impermanence. The crack in a ceramic bowl, the patina on weathered bronze, the slow, graceful decay of wood. It is the acceptance of the natural cycle of growth, decay, and death. It's the philosophy I built my career on as an architect in Tokyo. It is also the philosophy my childhood home actively, violently rejected. The call came on a Tuesday in late October, a day of relentless, gray rain that turned the Tokyo skyline into a watercolor smudge. It was my aunt. Her voice, usually a cheerful warble, was thin and brittle. My father, Haruto Tanaka, had passed away. A heart attack, swift and merciless, in the garden he had tended with such quiet devotion. My first coherent thought, after the initial shockwave of grief subsided into a cold, hollow ache, was of the house. The house in Takasaki, a 2-hour bullet train ride from my sterile, minimalist apartment. The house I hadn't set foot in for nearly a decade. The official reason for my estrangement was my career. The real reason was a gnawing, unspoken dread that had taken root in my teens. A feeling that the house was not just a structure of wood and plaster, but a living entity with a will of its own. A will that demanded stasis. I took the first train the next morning. As the Shinkansen sliced through the countryside, the urban sprawl of Tokyo gave way to rolling hills and patchwork farms. Takasaki is famous for Daruma dolls, the round, papier-mâché talismans of good luck and perseverance. You buy them with 2 blank white eyes. You make a wish and paint in one eye. When the wish comes true, you paint in the other. My father had loved them. He said they were a symbol of resilience. I would soon learn how terribly right he was. Pulling up to the house in a taxi, the first inkling of wrongness prickled my skin. It looked perfect, not just well-maintained, but impossibly, supernaturally perfect. We'd moved in 25 years ago. The house was a modest, post-war 2-story structure, a blend of traditional Japanese design with Western comforts. By now, the crisp white exterior paint should have been yellowed by the sun, perhaps peeling in the humid Gunma summers. The dark-stained wooden beams of the entryway should have been faded and weathered. The slate tiles on the roof should have borne streaks of moss or the ghostly residue of countless seasons. There was nothing. It was as if it had been built yesterday. I paid the driver and walked up the stone path, my suitcase wheels
rumbling a sound that felt like a sacrilege against the profound silence. The garden was immaculate. My father's bonsai trees were perfectly sculpted, the moss a vibrant emerald carpet around their roots. The azalea bushes were neatly trimmed, not a single dead leaf marring their surfaces. It was the work of a man with endless time, yes, but it was more than that. It felt curated by an unseen, obsessive hand. The front door slid open before I could touch it. My mother, Emmy, stood in the Genkan. She was smaller than I remembered, her frame lost in a simple gray dress. Her face, once round and quick to smile, was a mask of placid sorrow. But it was her eyes that held me. They were distant, as if she were looking at a memory of me, not the man standing before her. "Kenji," she said, her voice a soft, rustling whisper. "You came." "Of course, Mom." I stepped inside, slipping off my shoes. The air within the house was cool, still, and smelled faintly of cypress wood and something else. Something clean, like ozone after a lightning strike. Nothing had changed. The same calligraphy scroll hung in the alcove, its ink a stark, fresh black. The same polished floorboards gleamed under the soft light, without a single scuff or scratch. I remember dropping a heavy toolbox there when I was 16, leaving a deep, ugly gouge. I had stared at that gouge for a week, dreading my father's anger, only for it to be gone one morning, the wood smooth and seamless, as if the event had never happened. My parents had brushed it off, saying my father had fixed it in the night. But my father was a terrible carpenter.
"Where is Yuki?" I asked, referring to my younger sister.
"In her room." "Resting," my mother said, her gaze drifting past me, inspecting a wall as if searching for a flaw that would never appear. "The preparations are made. The service is tomorrow." Her calmness was more unsettling than tears would have been. She moved through the house with a serene, gliding motion, her feet making no sound. She was less a grieving widow and more the head priestess of a silent, immaculate temple. I went upstairs. The wooden steps didn't creak under my 180-pound frame. They never had. My room was exactly as I'd left it a decade ago. Posters of American rock bands were still taped to the wall, their colors unfaded by the sun that streamed through the window. My old architecture textbooks sat on the shelf, their spines uncracked, showing no signs of age or dust. It was a perfect, preserved diorama of my adolescence. A museum of a boy I no longer was. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. This wasn't nostalgia, it was a violation. Time was a river, and this house was a dam, holding everything back. I found Yuki in her room, lying on her bed, staring at the ceiling. She was 22 now, but looked no older than 16, frail, pale, with large dark eyes that seemed to swallow the light. "Kenji," she whispered, a faint smile touching her lips. "You're back." "Yuki." I sat on the edge of her bed. The air in her room was heavy, thick with a lethargic sweetness. "How are you feeling?" "Tired," she said. "The house, it's very quiet now that Dad is gone." The way she said the house, as if it were a person, sent a chill through me. "What do you mean?" She turned her head to look at me, and for a moment the fog in her eyes cleared. "It misses him. It's been humming."
Before I could ask what she meant, our mother was at the door.
"Yuki, darling, don't trouble yourself. Kenji, let her rest." Her voice was soft, but the command was absolute. She was guarding her. But from what? From me, or from the outside world? The funeral was a blur of black suits, incense, and hushed condolences. Relatives I hadn't seen in years remarked on how wonderful the house looked, how well my mother was holding up. "Haruto would be so proud," one uncle said, patting my shoulder. "This house is his legacy. It will stand forever." The words, meant as a comfort, landed like a curse. After everyone had left, the three of us sat in the main living area around the low table. The silence was absolute. Not a peaceful silence, but a waiting, listening silence. I decided I couldn't bear it any longer. "Mom," I began, my voice sounding harsh in the stillness. "We need to talk about what's next. You and Yuki can't stay here alone. Maybe you could come to Tokyo with me. I have a spare room. We can sell this place. The reaction was instantaneous and terrifying. The placid mask on my mother's face shattered. Her eyes flashed with a feral, protective fire. Sell? She hissed, the word a blade. Sell this house? Never. This is our home. This is your father's home. Mom, it's not practical. This house took care of your father. She cut me off, her voice rising. They kept him safe. They kept everything perfect for him. We will not abandon it. Suddenly, a glass of water on the table vibrated, the ripples moving in concentric circles. Yuki gasped and clutched her head.
You're upsetting the house, Kenji, she cried, her voice filled with real pain.
What are you talking about? I demanded, looking from my hysterical sister to my rigid mother. It's a house. It's wood and nails and concrete. As if in response, a framed family photo on the mantelpiece, one of the four of us smiling on the day we moved in, rattled against the wall. A low, resonant hum began to fill the room, a sound that seemed to emanate from the very foundations of the building. It was the sound of a massive, sleeping thing, stirring in its slumber. My mother stood up, her eyes locked on mine. You left, she said, her voice low and accusatory. You don't understand. We have a covenant. We take care of the house, and it takes care of us. Your father understood. He gave himself to it. That night's sleep was impossible. The hum was a constant pressure against my eardrums. I lay in my teenage bed, a stranger in my own past, and felt the house watching me. It was an active, intelligent presence, and it regarded me as an intruder, a threat to its perfect, unchanging world. I started to test it. The next morning, I found a loose floorboard in the hallway, a minor imperfection I was sure I'd never noticed before. A fluke. I knelt, pressing on it. It wiggled. A feeling of grim satisfaction went through me. See, you're not perfect. I went downstairs. An hour later, I returned. I knelt down. The floorboard was solid, immovable, fused with the boards around it, as if it had been forged from a single piece of wood. I tried something more direct. In the kitchen, I took a steak knife from the block and, with my heart pounding, made a long, deep scratch in the lacquered surface of the wooden countertop. It was a vicious, ugly scar. My mother, who was in the garden, would be furious. I left the kitchen, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. I busied myself for a few hours, sorting through some of my father's papers in his study. I found old blueprints of the house. No records of any historical significance to the land, no mention of a shrine or a cemetery. It was just a plot of land. But in the margins of one document, my father had written a single, shaky note. It heard me. The day we arrived, it heard my wish.
My blood ran cold. I remembered that day. My father had just lost his job at a major corporation. We had to sell our apartment in Yokohama and downsize. He had felt like a failure. Standing in the empty living room of this new, strange house, he had gathered us for a hug and whispered, his voice thick with unshed tears. I wish this could be a new start. I wish this happiness, this perfect moment with my family, could last forever. A child's wish, a desperate man's plea thrown out into the universe, and something had answered. I went back to the kitchen. I ran my hand over the countertop where I'd made the cut. Nothing. The surface was as smooth and flawless as polished glass. There was no sign of the scratch, not even a faint trace. It hadn't been repaired. It had been unmade. The house hadn't fixed the damage. It had erased the event. The true horror began to dawn on me. The house wasn't just preserving itself. It was enforcing a state of being, the state of that first perfect day. The next few days were a descent into a quiet, suburban madness. I started seeing things. Fleeting glimpses of my father in the garden out of the corner of my eye, turning to find only an empty space. The faint sound of his favorite classical music station fading the moment I tried to locate the source. The house wasn't haunted by his ghost. It was haunted by his memory, which it replayed like a corrupted video file. My sister's condition worsened. She grew paler, more listless. She rarely left her room, and when she did, she moved with the same soundless gliding motion as our mother. They were being absorbed, their personalities sanded down and polished to fit the house's aesthetic. I found my father's Daruma doll in his study. It sat on his desk, a squat, red figure of defiance. He had painted in the left eye his wish. The right eye remained, starkly, accusingly blank. His wish had come true, but not in the way he'd intended. It had become a prison. He had never been able to paint in the second eye because the condition for its fulfillment, everlasting, static happiness, was a curse from which there was no escape.
He hadn't died of a heart attack. He had died of stagnation. The house had kept him and used him up.
The breaking point came a week after the funeral. I decided I had to get my mother and sister out, by force if necessary. I confronted my mother in the living room. "We're leaving, Mom. Today. I'm taking you and Yuki back to Tokyo." "No," she said simply, not looking up from the flower arrangement she was meticulously crafting. "A perfect ikebana. No stray leaves, no wilting petals." "Yuki is sick. This place is killing her," I yelled, my voice cracking. "The house is protecting her," she replied, her voice dangerously calm. "It's protecting us from the messiness of the world, from change, from pain, from death. Your father is still here, Kenji. Can't you feel him? He's in the walls, in the light. He's part of the peace. That's not Dad. It's an echo, a memory. He's gone." At the word gone, every light in the house flickered and went out, plunging us into a gloomy twilight. A deep, groaning sound came from the floor beneath our feet, the sound of immense pressure. Yuki screamed from upstairs. I ran to her room. She was thrashing on her bed, her eyes rolled back in her head. "Make him stop," she shrieked. "It hurts. He's making the house angry." The temperature in the room plummeted. My breath plumed in front of me. The window rattled in its frame, not from wind, but from an internal vibration. The walls seemed to be subtly warping, the straight lines of the doorframe appearing to curve and bend. The house was focusing its energy, its displeasure, on me. It was a psychic attack, a crushing wave of despair and hopelessness. It wanted me to give up, to accept the peace, to stay. I grabbed Yuki's arm. "We're getting out of here." Her skin was ice cold. She fought me, her small frame possessing a shocking, wiry strength. "No, I can't. I'm part of it. It will fall apart if I leave." Our mother appeared in the doorway, her face a kabuki mask of fury. "Let her go, Kenji. You will not take her from us." The word us no longer meant the family. It meant her and the house. I looked at my mother, at my sister, and I saw the truth. They were no longer just living in the house. They were extensions of it. Their life force was intertwined with its supernatural integrity. If I tried to drag them out, it might kill them. Fighting the house physically was impossible. It could repair any damage, erase any change. So how do you fight something that rejects change? You introduce a concept so antithetical to its existence that it cannot process it. You don't break a wall. You break the idea of the wall. My mind, trained in logic and structure, raced. The house was anchored to a memory, to a single desperate wish for stasis. It fed on the emotional energy of that wish. My father's grief, my mother's fear, my sister's innocence. It had twisted my father's desire for a perfect family life into this monstrous, unchanging perfection. To break the spell, I had to introduce a new, more powerful wish, an antithetical wish. I ran to my father's study, the house groaning and protesting around me. The air grew thick and heavy, like I was moving through water. Whispers slithered in the air. My own voice as a child, my father's laugh, my mother's lullabies. The house was using my own memories as weapons, trying to drown me in a sea of perfect, painless nostalgia. I ignored them. I grabbed the Daruma doll from the desk. Holding it tight, I ran back to the living room, where my mother was trying to soothe the whimpering Yuki. "Mom, listen to me," I said, my voice steady, authoritative. I was an architect again, a man who understood foundations. Dad's wish created this. It was a wish born of love, but it's become a cage. We have to let him go. We have to let the memory go. "He is not a memory," she whispered, stroking Yuki's hair. "Yes, he is, and that's okay. We have to choose to move on. We have to make a new wish." I held up the Daruma. Its single painted eye seemed to stare at me with my father's desperate hope.
What was Dad's greatest wish, Mom? Not just for things to stay the same. What did he really want? My mother looked at me, her own memories fighting against the house's influence. Tears began to well in her eyes, the first genuine emotion I had seen from her in days. He wanted his children to be happy. She choked out. To grow up. To have their own lives. Exactly, I said. To grow. To change. That is the opposite of what this house wants. I found a black marker on a side table. I uncapped it, the click echoing in the tense silence. I held the Daruma out to my mother. Make a new wish, Mom. A wish for the future, not the past. Wish for Yuki to be free. Wish for us to leave this place and live. Wish for this house to finally rest. The house fought back. A cold wind ripped through the room, though all the windows were sealed. A book flew from a shelf, slamming into the wall beside my head. The humming intensified to a deafening roar. Yuki screamed. It doesn't want to. It doesn't want to die.
It's not dying, I yelled over the din. It's learning to live, to age. Mom, now. With a shaking hand, my mother took the marker. She looked at the blank right eye of the Daruma, the symbol of an unfulfilled, corrupted dream. Tears streamed down her face, washing away the placid mask. She was my mother again, grieving and afraid, but she was her. I wish, she began, her voice a fragile thread against the storm of the house's rage. I wish for my children's future. I wish for them to be free. I wish for this house to let us go. She pressed the tip of the marker to the doll's face and, with a single decisive stroke, filled in the second eye. For a moment, there was an absolute, crushing silence. The humming stopped. The wind died. Then, a sound I had never heard in that house before. The faint, unmistakable creak of settling wood. It was followed by another, a groan from the ceiling beams. Outside, I heard a clatter as a single roof tile, loosened from its perfect setting, slid down and shattered on the stone path below. I looked at the wall where the family photo had rattled. A hairline crack, fine as a spider's thread, snaked its way down the plaster. Yuki gasped, but it was a gasp of air, not pain. Color was returning to her cheeks. She sat up, looking around in wonder. It's getting older, she whispered. My mother was sobbing, clutching the completed Daruma to her chest. They were tears of grief, but also of release. We didn't wait. I grabbed my mother and sister and we walked out of the house without looking back. We left everything behind. The furniture, the photos, the clothes, the 25 years of perfectly preserved memories. As we walked down the path, we heard another sound. The loud, sharp crack of a window pane breaking under the strain of a warping frame. The spell was broken. Time, held at bay for a quarter of a century, had returned to the house in a flood. We sold the property a few months later to a developer, with full disclosure of its peculiarities. I heard they tore it down. They said that by the time the demolition crew arrived, the house looked like it had been abandoned for 50 years. Covered in vines, its roof sagging, its paint peeled away to reveal the raw, aging wood beneath. It was finally embracing wabi-sabi. It was finally beautiful. My mother and sister live in a small apartment not far from me in Tokyo. It's a normal apartment. The paint chips, things break, dust gathers in the corners. It's gloriously, beautifully imperfect. Yuki is going to college. My mother is learning to paint. Sometimes in the quiet of the night, I still feel a phantom hum in my bones, a memory of that crushing stillness. It's a reminder that the most terrifying ghosts aren't the spirits of the dead, but the echoes of a past that refuses to let go. And the most haunted places are not the ones filled with death, but the ones that refuse to allow life, in all its messy, painful, and fleeting glory, to run its natural course.